Do I look red to you?
A little pink.
Yeah, this might be the reason why. Look what I've been eating. Have you ever seen a strawberry like that? It almost looks like a big fat heart. And yum, are these delicious. Today, my message to you, and hopefully the word of Elohim to you for today, is entitled Love Punch. The text is Matthew 5:24 through 46, which is read in the course of the message. There was a time when I found myself reading a textbook for ministers that was over 100 years old. Within there was a chapter entitled Duties of the Pastor. Now listen to this. It reads, "The pastor shall have the duty of disciplining sinful members of the congregation to the extent of expelling them from the assembly and terminating their membership." Oh, yes, those were the days when open the door of the church and they will come, no matter who they were or what they were doing, but no more. These days, the minister's primary responsibility is getting folks to come in and sit down for an hour. We've gone to great lengths to get people to come and sit in a pew. See, the pressure comes from the higher-ups who need their ministers primarily to get folks money to pay those higher-ups who make quite large salaries and to keep the denominational expenses afloat. Before I went into the ministry and was looking for a church to attend, this is a long time ago, the first question I'd ask the church representative was, how much money did your church bring in last year? And how much of it went to missions? Now, at the time, that was my measure of the validity of churches. That is, the ratio of gross income to missions giving. I investigated the largest church in town at that time. It had income of over $100,000. The amount registered as given to missions was $200 out of that $100,000. That's 0.002%, if my calculation is right. But doesn't that tell you something? But back to the paragraph I quoted from 100 years or so ago. Today, how can a minister discipline sinful members and troublemakers? If a church pastor took the quote's advice to expel and terminate them, you can bet that the minister would soon be expelled and terminated, to the utter joy of the sinful members. One pastor from the first decade of the previous century solved his problem and somehow kept his job. The account of his action was in another old book. When I first read it, it really tickled me. Now listen. The minister was appointed to an assembly that was badly split and torn by a few troublemakers. He dealt with the guilty persons patiently. He tried very hard to bring the congregation together for a revival. But revival was not what they wanted. He astonished them one day by proclaiming, "I'm going to open the door of the assembly, the back door. I would like the following members to now come forth." He called forward several troublemakers. They thought they would get commended, but with tears streaming down his cheeks on account of the agony they put him through, he declared to them, "You folks up front have become a curse to this assembly. You've hindered Jehovah's work, and you've stood in as an obstacle to the salvation of souls. Now, without causing the assembly further disturbance, As you gave your pastor your hand in fellowship when joining, now take my hand and withdraw out the back door. The men and women of that time went without argument, just as the pastor requested, coming forward to shake his wet old hand, wet with tears, then leaving the sanctuary through the back door. That was a miracle. Soon the assembly was able to see the results of this act of ministry, a great season of revival. That is a true story for a minister. And I don't know if you could get away with it these days, but look, I tried to a couple times. I read the old story in about 1996. The witchcrafters in the new church to which I was appointed persecuted my wife and I relentlessly, causing us to shed tears on several occasions. Mignon was crying on the outside and I was crying on the inside. I tried this old pastor's way on some witches attending one ominous service. I actually did this twice. I knew that they were witches because they haughtily told me in privacy that they were, and that they'd come to destroy the fellowship and me. The witch and crew did indeed leave as I commanded them, but not without threatening words in front of the rest of the congregation. And of course, the congregation was on the side of those poor, innocent witches. That was the start of our troubles, because these witches headed right out for the next church down the road and told that congregation just how badly they had been treated by me. Now, it's caused an uproar in the small community. That uproar lasted about a month. And then that church got wise to their new prospects. But soon after, great revival came to our church. Oh, yes, so we had a church that maybe 20 people would show up. Soon after that, we had over 100 people in the church, and it was full for revival. Father visited. The place was packed out, and some folks were revived, just as they were in the storybook quote. But during this time, we encountered a demon of hate for these folks. A demon Mignon and I accepted in through the doors of our hearts. I tell you what, you'll resonate with this. It felt mighty good to hate those people and talk about them. But we knew it was our duty to love them no matter what they did. We knew that. We talked about that. Notice, though, that I said duty to love, not pleasure. What was that going to look like? For love was commanded by the Savior according to his new commandment. Matthew 5:34 through 35 and 43 through 46. He says, a new commandment I give to you, that you agapete, love one another, even as I have loved you, that you may also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for another. But he goes on to say that you've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Why, the Essene said that. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Of course, at that time, the tax collectors were considered the lowest of the low because they were traitors to Israel, collecting the taxes of the Romans. As I mentioned, the Dead Sea Scrolls tell us to love our friends, but hate our enemies. In this passage, Yeshua is correcting the Qumranians. Now, there are several Greek words translated as love. You know all about this. You've heard it several times. But Yahshua chose agape, alpha, gamma, alpha, p, eta, which isn't a love that we are really very familiar with in our culture. It's not a fond feeling for someone. Oh, hardly. It's not romantic. It's working love, sacrificing love, suffering love, tough love. Agape doesn't even require friendship. Now, there's another word for that. There are 5 Greek words that are translated as love, but they don't all mean the same. Agape has a lot more to do with works than feelings, duties than services, including how we treat creatures despite how they treat us, including enemies. Doing it is a tall, tall order. Agape is the duty to love, the duty of love for the unlovely, for the unlikely, for the saint and sinner, and even the despised enemy. It's a love that begs the question, what shall I do for the other? How can I relieve the other? And how can I correct the other? According to Yahshua, agape also requires that we have corrected ourselves first before correcting the other. And after days of prayer, literally, honestly, and time and thought, we were encouraged to try to love those witches while continuing to hate their practices. And I tell you, we did try. And I'll tell you how we tried just in a little bit. Agape has little to do with even being around someone. An old-timey pastor once told me, this is years ago, how he loved one of the church trustees that he hated. He stated, this man would slander me outside the assembly and curse me inside. He hindered the work of Elohim, persecuted committed believers. It got to the point where he was turning one member against another with lies and half-truths. But I loved this man once and for all after a board meeting. I bloodied his nose with my fist, and we never had another problem. Sometimes agape requires a violent response. Now, is that so shocking? Love punch. People such as these fear Elohim to such a small extent that they broadcast bold lies, gossip, outright slander against saints like you and me. Some feed on drama while pretending to be saints. I've even heard there were some who despised me. Can you imagine? Like you, I wondered what I'd done to deserve their spite. Some just don't like the way we look. Let's be honest. Maybe the devil made them do it. Yet we should count it all joy to be worthy of persecution for the sake of Messiah. Agape, thus, is a love that doesn't always feel good. In fact, seldom feels good. A love that might even be torturous. A love that carries the demanded burden that we agape these people too, somehow. Love in our language is not descriptive of a genre such as agape. People get mixed up about this. One friend has told me many times, oh, I just love everybody. He's either a liar or stupid. I heard this just recently. The question has often been asked, what shall we do about those who are bitter, unloving, and mean-spirited? Should we open the back door, then give them the left foot of fellowship? Or should we just punch them in the nose? They are the most difficult in our lives to deal with. Amen? I question myself. What am I to do with folks who need stern correction? The example set by Yahweh seems to be, you must deal firmly, deal honestly. Even those you hate, you must deal with in agape, whatever it takes. Is it not a burden to agape those who hate us or spitefully use us? Those who are declared enemies. Are declared enemies or ecclesiastical saboteurs. Master, how do we love our enemies? Such a command as that is contrary to the nature of humankind. Take a look at one answer from the epistles. 1 John 3, 1 through 8. Just do a couple of verses. See what love the Father has given us that we should be called children of Elohim, for that's what we are. The reason the world doesn't know our identities is that it didn't know him. But now we are Elohim's children. What we'll become has not yet been revealed. But what we do know is this: if we are to live in agape, when he is revealed, we will be like him, for we will see him as he is. That means that we'll no longer just see him as simply a man. And all who have this hope in him purify themselves, just as he is pure. Again, the implication is that such an agape, though it's not natural, is a duty. Agape takes effort because we don't feel the love. Yet, as our duty, we contend with the children of the world, sons and daughters of a devilish father. The children of the world may not be able to abide the children of the Father because they neither know him nor follow him, nor have they been reborn in his image. And that is tragic, but true. Spiritless humans. They have no spiritual eyes to behold the beauty of Messiah. Because they're of this world and its prince, and not of the Father, they naturally hold resentment for the elect. Naturally hold it. If they had the chance, even they couldn't tell you what they resent or what they hate about us. We were all such rebellious children until we surrendered to the agape of Messiah and found our duty. When we allowed Messiah in, that all begins a slow, progressive transformation toward the power of agape and perfection. When a company takes over another company, often there's a sign outside the company building that says, under new management. No sign so accurately summarizes what takes place when a child of this world is transformed into the child of the Father. When Messiah takes over a life, that life is under new management. The old starts crumbling as the new creation starts forming and continues striving toward perfection. That's from 1 John 4:17. How difficult it is for those human edifices that have cracked and encrusted under the foulness of the world to endure the renovation and renewal of somebody else's life. How enviously gray some become in the shadow of the new and the clean. How they may resent your gradual conversion. How they hate your new look and life. How they despise your beliefs and faith. You would think that they would never be able to be converted, but it takes a miracle. But now they wish to bring you back to the world and its prince. But to be under new management, to be converted from the world under the kingdom of the beloved, is absolutely required for your future as a man or woman of the Heavenly Father in his cosmic monarchy. All who hope in Messiah must take a reasoned and logical part in their own transformation. Work it all out with fear and trembling. We must eventually cease our anti-agape in order to fulfill our duty in agape and deal in agape with all, even if what we must do is not what we naturally would think. Now, some people have a natural, I've got to say, a natural propensity toward this kind of love. But most of us, me in particular, I do not. It's been, for me, a tremendous remaking, and several times a remaking, and a falling, and a getting up, and advancing 3 steps and falling back 2 over and over, sometimes advancing 2 and falling back 4. Here is a mundane but practical experience I once had in agape, but didn't necessarily enjoy. A nice lady that came into my office one day, a person who was demonstrating the fruit of her conversion, began telling a story. This is just a mild one compared to some other testimonies about the same thing. She said, "I'm afraid I'll have to divorce both my husband and my son. I work all day, then come home, fix their dinner, pick up after them, wash their clothes, serve them the rest of the evening, day after day after day. Does that sound familiar?" She continued, "I'm worn out. I've talked to them about this time after time. They promise to do better, but never fulfill their promise. Neither will they lift a finger to help. What should I do before I just give up?" Now, it so happened that I had studied this very situation in school. That is, in counseling studies in the seminary. I told her, "Well, lady, I suggest you do just give up. Go on strike in your home, but don't tell them that you are. Do absolutely nothing for them, but don't tell them why." Of course, she said she couldn't do that because they wouldn't let her. But I knew her family well by this time, and I knew also that they would do no violence to her. So she said, "I will try." Then about a week later, her husband wandered into the office. True story. He complained, "You got to help me with Donna. All of a sudden, she's not doing anything around the house. She no longer cooks or cleans, and there are piles of dirty laundry laying all over the place. I don't know what's wrong with her. She's always taken care of everything, but now she doesn't lift a finger. Something's wrong with her." I thought, no, something is right with her. This is the textbook way to work out a situation like this in agape. He continued, "Couldn't you talk to her and tell her to get to work on these things?" I was literally praising the Father while he was complaining about his wife. And I was ready for him. And I said something like this: "There's nothing that I can do, but there's plenty you can do. You work a part-time job. You have a lot of free time, right?" And he said, "Yeah, I do, but I've got," he worked on Mardi Gras committees in the city of Mobile. "I've got all these meetings to go to and stuff to get ready for the Mardi Gras." I said, "You can use some of that time to spend at home washing those clothes, fixing your own meals, and serving yourself instead of sitting in front of the television. Now, that's exactly what you can do." Now, he knew nothing about his wife's previous visit, but I think he was a naturally lazy man. He didn't like that idea at all, and he said he didn't know how to work a washing machine. I told him something like this: Robert, I know you're a very intelligent man, and until you can afford to buy a slave, this was in Mobile, you can choose to live like you are now, or you can make it your project to wash your own clothes and cook your own food. He said, but what about our son, Bill? Who'll take care of him? Their son was a teenager at that time. I said, you could enlist him in your housework. Don't you have authority over your son? He said, oh, not much. But he also complained, well, I guess I don't have any other choice. Now, do I? Nope, said I. I believe I was acting in agape and wisdom. He was a man I liked and loved and still do. A man whom I knew was working on his own conversion. Well, of course, he left in a huff out the door, a huff of fear and trembling. A few days later, his wife Donna returned. She was smiling. She said she did it, but it wasn't easy. She endured arguments and insults, but she stuck to her guns. A strong little woman. And that demonstrates the tough part of agape that we try to avoid like the plague. After all, it is a duty. But she completed her mission, and the result was that both her husband and son started doing the housework, and without complaint. Now, I don't know how long that lasted, but it could have lasted forever, as long as Donna practiced tough agape. Today, we're so used to computers for writing our letters on cheap computer paper, 500 sheets for $10. But have you ever written a letter by hand on fine bond paper? There's something elegant about it. You'll agree if you've ever touched any. Now, there's a paper factory in England that makes the finest stationery paper in the entire world. On a factory tour, a tourist asked the guide about the ingredients of this paper that made it so resilient, fine to the touch, absorbent of ink, and valuable. The guide showed him one of the huge piles of old, filthy rags that were here and there about the factory. He explained that the rag content in the paper is what determines the high quality of the stationery. Well, the tourist couldn't believe it. Filthy rags? Oily rags? As he left, he signed the company's guest book and said goodbye to the tour guide. 6 weeks later, the former tourist received a package of paper from the company with his initials embossed on it. On the first page were written the words in fine style with a valuable fountain pen. Herein find you a gift of filthy rags transformed. It's always amazing to witness the characteristics of the world in a person transforming into the perfection and loveliness of agape. The more devilish effects of the natural man seem to bring out the highest and best through the process of conversion. What I'm saying is, the worst men, the worst women convert into the best believers, the best heaven dwellers. The highest and best include the wisdom to make better decisions and to help others do the same. These decisions are easy to come upon, but they're not easy to fulfill. Often the methods that the Father provides the converted are not what the natural man might do at all. Sometimes directly opposite of what the natural man might do. And such wisdom is not conventional. Many don't allow the path of least resistance, but the pathway of the most resistance, that is, the hardest kind of love, agape kind of love, the righteous judgment of that love. Yet Elohim always gives his children the power of decision, the power of free will, the power of choice, to take the easy way, or to make one's life more valuable to those dying in their sins by taking the upward rocky path on their behalf. And believe me, divine wisdom is required, especially if you're like me, a man who naturally wants to seek the easy way, or when on the hard way upward, would be inclined to turn back toward the base camp before reaching the summit, that is, the perfection in and of love. We could cite example after example for the rest of the day if we wanted to. And we could solicit the stories of your struggles with love and together come to a proper decision with the help of the Ruach as to how to solve these struggles together through agape we've been given. But fortunately, today we're under time constraints and our time is up. But if I were to write a book called Agape for Dummies, I'd have to include the how-to advice of C.S. Lewis, who rejected royal honors in 1952, certainly out of agape. He puts love as duty into a final perspective for this message. C.S. Lewis, the rule for us all is perfectly simple. Don't waste time bothering whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we learn one of the great secrets. True. When you are behaving as if you love someone, or acting as if you love someone, you may presently come to love them. Whenever we do a good to another self, desiring its happiness as we desire ours, we shall have learned to love a little more, or at least to dislike it a little less. Now, I would include some words from my model, John Wesley, regarding what he said about faith and converting it into love. It struck into my mind immediately. Quit your preaching. How can you preach faith to others when you've not faith yourself? He writes, I asked Peter Bowler whether he thought I should quit or not. He answered, by no means. And I asked, but what can I preach? He said, preach faith till you have it. And then because you have it, you will preach faith. Now, this formula works even better in regard to our duty in agape for those who have too little of it. Speak of agape with your mouth until you have it. And then, because you have it, you will speak of agape from your heart. That seems to me to be the sacred way toward solving our problems with others, especially those that despise us for nothing that we've done. You know, we can always ask forgiveness when we do something, but quite a bit of the time, it's not anything we did. It's just the way we looked, the way we sounded, the way we smelled, the things we did that upset others. This is good advice. Speak it with your mouth until you have it, and then because you have it, you will speak of it from your heart. Remember this. Use it when you get out the door. No, give some troublemaker a love punch this week. Metaphorically, that is. Who knows? Even we might quest into the air, reach that Everest of perfection, and take our places as kings, priests, and judges in the eternal but unseen kingdom of the beloved. Amen, ve amen.